All right. Hello and happy Wednesday. Thank you all for joining the Alumni Society today for the latest installment in our microlearning series, which provides actionable advice and insights from members for members. I'm Christina Merrill, Member and Community Engagement and Communications Manager at the Alumni Society and a proud graduate of Columbia. Today, I'm happy to welcome member Patricia Bravo. Patricia is the founder of Bravo for You. Patricia, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you with us today. Time permitting, we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. So if you have a question for Patricia, please feel free to go ahead and drop it in the chat and we'll try and get to it. So let's dive right in. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, mi familia es chilena, and yet I was born in Canada. That always seems to catch people by surprise. And after that, before the age of 18, I lived on the East Coast, West Coast, and Midwest of the United States, moved around a ton. And one of the times when I was in the Midwest is when I went to graduate school and got my MBA at Notre Dame. I'm now based in Seattle.
Fantastic, fantastic. And what do you do today?
Today, well, I'd like to answer this question with a question. Have you, Christina, or anybody who's out there listening to us today, hello for those of you listening virtually, live, and in the recording. I like to ask the question if you've ever felt the ripple effect of a leader. Yes. I know that I have. Yeah, you have. I've seen both the positive ripples and the ripples that diminish others. And so I'm really on a mission to improve the team member experience at work. And that really happens with the leader as the leverage point. Their ripple effect on team members can really affect the team member experience. And one key differentiator is leading with empathy. And so as the founder of my company, Bravo for You, I've worked with Fortune 500 corporate clients, similar to those that I worked with in my career. And I also now serve individual leaders who want to get a taste of empathy through an Empathetic Leader Book Club, and I also have an educational program. I've had quite an interesting journey in this work.
Fantastic. And how did you begin your journey of empathetic leadership? What prompted this desire to teach others about leading with empathy?
Yeah, I imagine everyone listening here has been through some sort of professional transition of some sort. Have you ever been through one, Christina?
Yes, many times.
Yeah. Many times. Yeah, I think most of us have. And 9 years ago, when I made the transition from corporate life to entrepreneur, what I did to understand what I really wanted to focus in on is two things. One is I mined my own experiences that I had at work. And I had one light bulb go off. And the first light bulb that went off is I realized that leaders that I had been working with who had achieved different results were leading with empathy. And the second light bulb that went off is that I realized when I was coaching leaders at work, I was coaching them through the lens of empathy. We weren't using that vocabulary at the time, but it was one of the things that I found was most valuable. And that is a part of my story, but I also have a really personal component, which is one of the most powerful things that drives me to do this work is that during a very difficult time, my life was changed by an empathetic leader. And Christina, before this call, we were talking about how you recently had an experience where you were talking to somebody that had a similar experience as well, and it really affected that person's professional willingness to participate and stay engaged with a company. And so I think there's a lot of stories out there like that. So I think there's definitely a real business component, but I think there's a real personal connection that I have to this work as well.
Fantastic. And so on that note, let's take a moment to define empathetic leadership. Sometimes these buzzwords can really just kind of get thrown around and misconstrued. So, let's take a moment. What is empathetic leadership? What does that mean?
Sure. I think the most important thing to know is that empathy is about understanding. And so I define empathetic leadership as accurately identifying cues and clues to activate that understanding. So I think that, the real shortcut, the way to think about it is really empathy is about understanding and gaining understanding.
Fantastic. And then why is empathetic leadership so important for the workplace?
I think we really have to look at it through three different lenses. through the lens of the organization, through the lens of the team member, and through the lens of the leader. And so maybe I'll talk about all three of those. For organizations, the benefits that they gain are a collective increase in team member performance and productivity. And people are always curious when I start to talk about this. And I'm really excited that the research is now coming behind some of the experiences that many of us have seen in the workplace. There's a landmark study that came out real recently in 2019 in the Journal of Organization and Leadership Studies that confirms that leader understanding through empathy actually improves team member performance. And there's some research that happened out of the University of Texas that took the conversation even a little bit further. They were really trying to get some quantifiable data. And I get asked a lot about quantifiable data around empathy because there still is this myth, this perception that it's a soft skill rather than something that influences the business and the direction in which leaders can go. And so this research at the University of Texas studied empathetic leadership, and they discovered that for every standard deviation increase of empathetic leadership, organizations can expect a 20% increase in performance. So a 10% increase in empathetic leadership might lead to $1,000 annual performance increase per person. Now, that's taking into account kind of current economic data. So essentially what it's saying is that when an employee performs at a higher level, it can actually directly impact the performance and productivity of an organization and ultimately their success. And so I was really excited when I started to see some of this data because some of the work that I have looked at in the past hasn't had a chance to get us to this place where we're really getting some of this quantifiable data. And so we're starting to see a lot more of it now. And so that's really what I find is the benefit in the workplace organizationally. Now, I'd say there's also two other places where you see the benefits. One is for the leader and the other is for the team member, kind of the area that I really wanted to focus on. And so one of the things that I ask team members to do, and sometimes leaders can be team members as well, is to give me some words that described times when they don't feel understood at work. And they often give me words like, I feel undervalued, I feel angry, alone, frustrated, unseen, unmotivated. And then I ask them to tell me the flip side. What are some of the things that describe what you feel like when you are feeling understood at work? And they say things like invigorated and supported, appreciated, motivated, more confident, more relaxed, free. And so I really like to invite leaders to think about this and a couple of other areas. So the impact on the team member is really clear by their description. But leaders are needing to drive their business. And so leaders often consider this and say, yes, I hear this is important. And what are some other ways in which empathy can make an impact? And what I find is that leaders really resonate with two other areas. One is places where they can save time, and the other is improving decision-making. And so I like to ask leaders, what if leading with empathy could save you time? It can. And that's one of the benefits of leading with empathy. It's one of the reasons why it's important in the workplace. Empathetic leadership can save you time through the creation of relationship shortcuts. The more you empathize and you understand the team members that you're working with, the more likely it is you start to build stronger bonds and trusting relationships that ultimately develop into some relationship shortcuts, which save you time in your interactions over time. The other place that I like to ask leaders is, what if empathy could improve your decision-making? And it can. It will add some human data that will be added in addition to any other data that you're collecting, whether it's qualitative or quantifiable. It essentially makes the data set more comprehensive so you can make even stronger decisions.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. And so on that note, on the flip side, what are the consequences of not leading with empathy? What have you seen in your work?
Yeah. The simple answer is a leader can miss things and not have the context to be fully informed as they're making decisions, not just related to humans, but in their business. Maybe somebody has some additional information that they didn't feel comfortable giving to a leader. Maybe a leader was moving too quickly and they didn't take the time to understand what was going on a particular project. We know that leaders are under pressure in the workplace every day, and particularly in the climate I think that we're in right now. And so they're moving quickly, and they need to be moving quickly in order to be successful. And if they invest a little bit of time, and by the way, it only takes 10 minutes to empathize, they can gain some additional information to avoid missing some of these opportunities. But I do want to say, I think right now, kind of thinking about the climate that we're in right now, I think there's a consequence that's actually worse than not leading with empathy. It's saying you're going to lead with empathy and then not following through. Because this essentially erodes trust and it breaks down relationships. Earlier this year, I think it was in March, EY came up with, did some research, and they came up with some data that showed 52% of employees that were surveyed perceive current attempts at empathy by leaders to be inauthentic. And so I thought that was pretty significant, that that's what the experience is. So we're seeing a lot of conversation. We're hearing a lot of conversation about the topic of empathy and leadership and the importance of it. And yet it's not translating to action. And so I think we have to be really thoughtful and mindful about what the impact of that is.
And that is a great segue into our next question, which is, what are some common misconceptions or challenges leaders face when trying to incorporate empathy into their leadership style, and how can they overcome them?
Yeah, the biggest aha I think I hear from leaders when we're having conversations about this is a myth that empathy equals agreement, when in fact, empathy is neutral. Empathy is simply about understanding. And I can understand something and not agree. So, for example, take a topic that's really has different perspectives in today's climate, the concept of hybrid work. We know that people are thinking about this in all sorts of different ways. You're smiling, right? You've heard this a lot. We've all heard this a lot. So I could understand, if I'm a leader, that my entire team wants to work remotely this entire month, and yet I know that we need to get together at least once to prepare, let's say, a board presentation. So I can empathize and gain some understanding around that, but my actual business decision is formed by the usual factors that I would use to inform all of my decisions, which is around what the business needs are. So I can absolutely understand and appreciate the desire to work remotely the entire month. And I might need to say, we are going to need to come in one day in order to prepare for this presentation, because we need to have the actual interactions to prepare for this.
Fantastic. Nice way to compromise. And on that note, how can leaders strike a balance between empathy and the business priorities?
Yeah, I think it goes back to this idea that empathy is about understanding, and understanding does not equal agreement. And so I think we have to maybe reframe things and think about how empathy and business priorities actually go hand in hand, rather than either or. So if empathy is about gaining understanding, that understanding informs your business. It's a part of your business, as opposed to, yes, you're going to engage in it, or no, you're not. It's actually about bringing the two together so they coalesce.
Fantastic. And backtracking to what you said earlier, I love how you say empathy is neutral. I never would have thought of it like that, but you bring up such a great point.
Yeah.
And how have you seen individuals and organizations thrive under empathetic leadership?
I will say it's difficult to label or find an organization. There's a few out there, but a complete organization that's heavily focused on empathetic leadership. What I'm finding is that there are pockets. They're in functions. They're in parts of the organizations, or sometimes in smaller organizations, where you see a lot of that. Something that I tried to do through some research that I conducted is uncover more of those stories. When I did some research about 5 years ago, I was really interested in understanding if empathy is a vehicle for authentic leadership. And I was invited to do some research on that. And people were quite surprised when I chose to do that research in a geographic area that they weren't expecting. The researchers were very interested in having a global perspective, which I was really excited about, because more than 90% of the research on leadership is actually conducted in the US. And so I think we're missing an opportunity to really expand that and examine the global perspective. And so, so I think our audience today will probably be curious to hear that I chose Latin America as the continent that I wanted to study, partly from my own background and my own experiences, partly because we don't do enough research there. We've gone to the kind of the economic powerhouses where it's important to, of course, do some research there, but I think we're missing the opportunity to have kind of a complete 360 view if we don't focus on some of the other geographic areas as well. So I was really interested in doing that. And one of the most striking things that I heard when I conducted this particular research is leaders that were working in climates and organizations that they described as having very little empathy. In fact, some of them described them as being environments that they would describe as cutthroat, very competitive, heavily competitive. They said that they actually chose to take a stand and lead with empathy. And because they were so different than what they were experiencing in the organizational culture, they had a lot of people that started to follow them and want to connect with them as leaders, want to be part of their teams, want to be mentored by them. And so that was a little bit of a surprise. I didn't expect to hear that. But I think it certainly requires some courage and some intentionality and thoughtfulness, how to approach empathy if you're in an environment that does not yet, it doesn't resonate with the organization, the culture is not ready for it, no one's talked about it yet. I think it does take, some thoughtfulness in how you engage in that way. But I think that the fact that that leader's team was able to thrive in a climate that wasn't necessarily supportive of that really stood out. I think we can all think about the examples of companies that are really human focused and human centered, where this would, fit right in really neatly with them. Of course, that would be the case, but this one really stood out for me as a way in which a leader can gain a leadership advantage and also improve the nature of their business within an organization that's operating really differently.
Love it. Love it. Courage, thoughtfulness. Would certainly love to hear these words more associated more with top leadership. I think that would be pretty fantastic. Great. And so on that note, what actions can leaders take today if they want to lead with empathy? Where can they start?
I think all of us have kind of a sense of our degree of empathy. And so I think just being intentional about thinking for ourselves, where are we today in terms of our ability to understand others? And I guess there's a couple of different ways you can do it. When I'm facilitating, a workshop or a session, I often ask leaders to consider whether they've been afflicted by this disease I coined called leaderitis. And leaders with this affliction often operate, under the belief that others are motivated by or view things in really similar ways to themselves. When the reality is we all have our own motivators and our preferences, and some might be shared and some might be different. But when you empathize, you get a greater understanding, and you can really confirm that, you can really validate that. And so, I like to jokingly ask, do you have a case of leaderitis? But really beyond that, this is really about checking on your degree of understanding. So whether you're new to empathy and leadership, whether you've used it before, whether you've approached it before, whether it's something that syncs with your approach and your style or not, I'd encourage you to experiment for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Go ask someone today about a recent interaction or a conversation that you might have had. Maybe you can say to somebody, hey, last week you mentioned, you were frustrated by this project. I took that as you were venting, but and you weren't really counting on me taking any action, did I understand that correctly? Go calibrate with a couple of people and interactions and conversations that you've had to check on your degree of understanding. I think many of us have heard, and Christina, tell me if you've heard this anecdote, the anecdote, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. You've heard that one before. Yeah, I think most of us have heard that. And it's a little bit of a misnomer because, the reality is we can't put ourselves 100% in others' shoes. So I like to think about it, on a continuum. If we were going to get to 100%, maybe that's the goal. And I think many of us have been in situations where somebody understood us, but not entirely. So if we were going to quantify, maybe we'd make it up and say, yeah, I think they got me, or they think they got what I meant. It was only about 25%. And so the goal here is to get closer to that 100%. And so check on what your degree of understanding is. Are you generally pretty accurate in understanding others, or do you have an opportunity to invest a little bit more in empathizing to gain some of that understanding?
Fantastic. And then can you share any recommended resources, books, or tools for those who are looking to develop their leadership skills with an emphasis on empathy?
Sure. Yeah. There's a couple of Harvard Business Review articles that I really like, and I'll tell you why. One of them is called Connect with Empathy, but Lead with Compassion. And the reason why I like this article, it's actually making a case for compassion versus empathy. But the reason why I like it is because it's demonstrating that compassion is a choice. And this is where I think sometimes leaders feel a lot of pressure to capitulate to requests that are being made by team members or by others. And compassion is one response. It's a choice. It's a response that leaders can make. And sometimes they'll be able to be as compassionate as they choose to. Other times they're going to have to put up either their personal or their business boundaries and make different choices. And so that article really helps you see what the difference is between empathy, which is gaining that understanding, and compassion, which is one response that you can offer. The other one I like is by Frances Fay, also out of Harvard, called Begin with Trust. And what she talks about is an empathy wobble. And the idea that, we all have different times when we're under pressure, particularly, again, leaders that are going 100 miles an hour, maybe haven't invested as much time as they might like to in empathy. And when do you wobble? When are you not quite as strong as empathizing? When does that come up for you? And so that's also another great way to just kind of get a temperature check on where you are in your kind of stage of empathizing, and where might you like to get to over time. I think those are some really great resources. And if you're somebody who likes to read books, you can join our Empathetic Leader Book Club. We read business books and discuss them through the lens of empathy. So that's another way to get a taste of empathy as well.
Fantastic. Well, as we all head into winter, I think a book club is in order. So thank you for letting us know about that.
Yeah.
Great. And now we will open the floor to questions from the audience. I did receive someone directly messaged me their question. Folks, that's totally fine if you want to do that, if you don't want to post it publicly. But someone sent me this question directly. In the context of Latinos in leadership, how can empathetic leadership practices help navigate diverse challenges and promote team cohesion?
Great question. Yes. It was really interesting when I conducted this research specifically in Latin America, because I didn't know what I was going to find. Interestingly, I found there was a lot of intersections with what the U.S. leadership research has found and what some of the experiences in the U.S. Have found. Not 100%, mind you. And so I think when we think about the context of leading with authenticity. And what I found in the research was that empathy definitely is a vehicle for authentic leadership. I think one of the things that we're thinking about from a diversity perspective, and I hear this a lot, people say to me, "Ooh, I have a DEI initiative, or we're really focused on inclusion. Can you come talk to me about that?" And I say yes to some degree, because empathy is one component of the foundation of looking at diversity and inclusion. So because you're looking at understanding, You are really opening and examining what the potential for differences are in an organization. And so I like the question is really focused also on team cohesion. I actually teach a class on managing teams. So this is something I feel really passionate about, is that empathy can really influence team cohesion, because when you are empathizing more, and you're increasing empathy over time. Again, it just takes 10 minutes, but those 10 minutes add up. And what happens is stronger relationships are built. The bonds get stronger, trust gets stronger. The relationship between team members and between team members and the leaders strengthens. And so over time, the team cohesion begins to build. Now, that's not the entire story around the team cohesion, but it is a foundational part. And I do find when I connect with folks that are really focused on the importance aspects of inclusions, that this is one component that they find is really important as well.
Fantastic, fantastic. Any other questions? Last call for questions. No, all good, all good. Well, thank you so, Patricia, thank you again so much for being here today and sharing your insight. You have some truly great experiences in this area, so thank you for sharing your wisdom. How can your fellow task members get in touch with you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. I try to stay pretty current and connected on LinkedIn. If anybody's interested in some additional resources, I'd be happy to share those as well, or any of the research I've done, I'm happy to share that. You can reach out to me directly. My email is patricia@bravoforyou. It's BRAVOFORYOU.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. All right. To our audience, if you are interested in sharing your knowledge and insights in an upcoming microlearning series webinar, email us at members@thealumnisociety.com with your idea. Thank you all again for joining us today. Stay tuned for the recording. Again, Patricia, it was an absolute pleasure to have you here. Thank you again so much for your time. And everyone, have a great rest of your week.